used spiritually. And when we talk about spiritual tools, we then also have to address like, what do we mean by something being spiritual, right? Because for some people, that might be dealing with emotional things, psychological issues. For some people, it's the complete focus on God and the going past the ego, or wonders there's something else. But if we now, for argument's sake, just say that spirituality is everything that has to do with us, the understanding of who we are and life and why we're here, and our place in the bigger picture. So we include both the emotional and psychological aspects of understanding ourselves and life. In that spectrum, psychedelics have been used all over the world with the purpose of trying to understand our own minds and moving into a different state. Remember that our brains are quite interesting and quite boring at the same time. It's built mainly to deal with practical functions and actions, right? Finding food, finding a mate, dealing with ourselves. And it's all on a very, what we call, horizontal level. It's that survival. We do things, we feel good when we do something that is productive, and we feel bad when we do something that is not. That. But that can also get in the way when we're trying to go beyond the survival level, and we're really trying to connect with what we often refer to as the spiritual, which is, in a way, everything beyond our own survival, right? And the connection to something greater. And psychedelics have been used so that people can relax their brains and relax the narratives that their brain comes up with, because how we perceive the world in a normal day-to-day way is not based on objective truth. It's not a true observation. It's how we observe and perceive based on our needs for horizontal survival. So our brains will filter out almost everything. And what you're left with will be information that's relevant to your survival, and then it will be stitched together, and then it will be washed through your experiences so far, and then you end up with what you perceive as reality. And that is not objective reality. And there is so much more, right? And humans have understood this through their spiritual work in different ways. And what everybody has discovered around the world is, if we do stuff to our brains, if we use psychedelics and all these things, something will happen. Our brains will let go, and we will experience the world in a very different way. And for some people, that's enough. That's more on the self-medication side of it, where we just do it to get away. For some people, that's also what they need in order to be able to live with themselves. But the potential is, when we use psychedelics to simply open a door and to be in a different modality in the brain that connects us with a different way of perceiving information, a different way for the brain to analyze information, and less will be filtered out. So you'll pick up on other forms of information, and will make you feel differently about yourself and the world, and the dialogue between the two. And that can be really interesting. So it can be used in both ways. I think in our society, because being human is painful. It's difficult, and most people are suffering in many different ways at the same time. They are stressed. They experience life as being unbearable emotionally, mentally, and practically, and it's difficult. And the level of complexity humans are experiencing today is beyond what we're designed for genetically. So people seek different forms of self-medication simply to feel that they can get away from it all. And I don't see the difference between overeating, using alcohol, entertainment, even sleep can be used as self-medication. Relationships like sex, anything can be used as self-medication. And most people today will use absolutely everything in their lives to self-medicate, right? We just need a break, and we feel we need it all the time. So as humans, we have developed so many different types of strategies around self-medication that it's shocking when you look at it from the outside, because humans will turn anything into a tool of self-medication. So I don't think there is any difference when you use a substance for self-medication or if you use entertainment. Sometimes with a substance, at least you get a different experience instead of just like falling asleep. So it's all a matter of how we use it in our approach. But I think, when we deal with psychedelics, we also have to look at what happened in the 50s and 60s, as Andy mentioned. There was an opening, and people started using them therapeutically, and we're starting to discover them in a way in our Western civilization. And there was such a kind of crash between the ways of thinking in the West and how these substances work that they were basically pulled down. And then we got the whole kind of drug thing around it. And that way of thinking, not seeing the potential as work tools to truly heal ourselves or to get in contact with deeper emotions or trauma or open new doors, right? Because this is when you look at the different traditions, they've used them with the intention of opening new doors, moving like past our boundaries and limitations and into new realms. And then the work starts, right? When you self-medicate and just want that, it's just experiencing something different. It can be valuable in itself, but when you do too much of that, it will have the opposite effect. It's just like when you use caffeine, for instance. In the beginning you feel perked, but after a while you need caffeine in order to feel normal because the brain will compensate. It's the same thing with all forms of substances. If we overdo them, if we have the intention of just letting it do the work for us, we will actually experience less of a presence than we did in the first place. And this often has happened with people dealing with substances, is that their presence in their lives, in themselves, actually diminish. I've seen this also in modern spirituality. Also dealing with ayahuasca and many of the substances that are popular today also in the spiritual community, people are actually getting less present, less aware, less connected, and then feel the need to use them in order to connect or to feel something, and they're not able to do it on their own. And it's because we humans, we're also lazy, and we like anything really to do the job for us. It's so important when it comes to psychedelics that they can't. They're not doing the job for us. We have to be active. We have to work. And in the 60s, and there was an understanding of this, also among psychiatrists and people in therapy dealing with this. But the backlash happened because of the resistance in human consciousness. And it was, in a way, mislabeled, and it kind of went away. What's interesting is that it has now resurfaced because of the work being done in the spiritual communities. It's not just ayahuasca, it's been like LSD, it's been mushrooms, it's been a lot of different things. And people have had profound experiences because now they've been traveling to Brazil and to other places and have these experiences in the right framework. It's not a party drug, it's a kind of ceremonial substance, ritual practices, consciousness, and then you get it. Because that was a starting point. That's how it's supposed to be used. And then because so many people have had those types of experiences, also people in the medical community, right? Also academics and, political leaders, leaders in business, they've been taking part in this, and we've gotten the understanding, oh, wow, okay, this is different. This is not taking drugs at a party. It's something completely different. So that has then opened the doors again to the medical community and scientists looking at this again, and we're just at the very start of it. So they're basically very kind of interesting tools, and we'll try to talk a little bit about the different aspects of them today. But if you have any comments or questions, please just share anything really.
Well, we'd been talking earlier that there's this really interesting sort of complex of there's potency in these different substances, and then there's this human tendency, as you said, to self-medicate and want to use them to withdraw rather than engage. And then you get this, on the other hand, you get such resistance. For example, in the 50s and 60s, most of this got shut down by a real, actual campaign of misinformation about how these substances work and their effects, and really the side effects that they claimed at that time. But we're seeing it again now, that there's this huge backlash again that these substances shouldn't be available, and it's just recreational. And what I find really fascinating is that self-medication is a part of our culture, and yet these particular substances, the psychedelics, are some of the least physically risky self-medication tools. And I thought I wanted your take on that angle around self-medication. Is it legitimate when it comes to psychedelics?
Well, again, going back to the 50s and 60s, remember that it was after World War II. The Western world was traumatized. Alcoholism was widespread, right? You have alcoholics all over the place trying to self-medicate. And that was part of the backdrop, why it kind of went sideways. Because the use of alcohol and seeing it as self-medication was so ingrained that whenever something else was available, that's obviously what it was for. It was very difficult to establish a different take, a different approach. So it was kind of just pulled into the post-war substance abuse, self-medication thing. And we're in a different place now. This is also why I think it will be different this time. The first time around, it's natural. It was after the war in a traumatized world. And also because people, when you look at normal people, there's been a lot of drugs around now for decades, and people have been partying and all that. And those people are now in positions. They're politicians. They're political leaders. They're leaders in medicine all over, and they have personal experience with substances. Even though it's been recreational, it means that people are more open-minded. Yeah, this is part of our culture. Drugs are part of our culture. So then, when you start looking at psychedelics from that perspective, and you're already more relaxed, you're able to relate to, right, this is not an alternative to being an alcoholic. It's not necessarily such that you will end up as an addict, because many of these substances, they do not trigger addiction the way alcohol does. So it's like the whole thing, how humans interpret it, these substances in the 50s and 60s, it simply, got off rail very quickly. So now we can deal with it in a different way, and it's a more kind of mature approach, and humans a lot wanting to learn to do it properly.
Recently, Michael Pollan wrote a book which was a New York Times bestseller talking about this whole thing. And one of the things that he speculated on was that the Vietnam War, that there were soldiers who were going away and then experimenting with these psychedelics, and they wouldn't fight anymore. And a huge problem with that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, as well as the whole thing about PTSD, which seems to be such a part of this movement right now to use psychedelics in therapy.
Yes, but you're absolutely right. It's hilarious, right? That alcohol will make people more aggressive, right? It will amplify negative emotions. You can also be a little happy, but mostly it can make people very aggressive. And these other types of substances will not. And yes, it will make people less aggressive. And that was looked upon as a huge problem. And it's just understanding that the Western culture is basically a living trauma. We've always found new ways to traumatize ourselves and to do strange things about it. And therefore, we relate to self-medication in ways that healthy cultures don't, right? People associate relaxation and feeling good, well, you need alcohol or sugar or something. You can't just be happy for no reason. So we're very unhealthy. And that is the problem, not the substances, but absolutely. This was part of why it was seen as a big threat, right? But the authorities, especially in the States, they had these huge campaigns and misinformation to scare people away, because PTSD can be treated with certain substances. And yes, today, that is where it has its biggest revival, is in that field. And one can see that just with one treatment, people can change. That can be your MDMA, it can be mushrooms, it can be many different things, but it's still, what happens is, in the brain, you've built a narrative, you've built a sense of reality. This is how things are, right? And your brain does not understand what's beyond the brain. So when you change your brain chemistry, and when you let the brain experience itself in a very different way, and it then comes to the conclusion that this is real. When we hallucinate, it's still just the brain processing information in itself and from around the world. It's the same thing. So then it will start doubting its own narratives and say, wow, okay, things are connected differently. And for instance, MDMA is a very interesting substance for treating all sorts of trauma, because it makes you feel connected. It has the potential of opening you to the experience of togetherness, the experience of being connected, and that you matter, and that there is kind of love in the world. Although it's still, yes, chemically induced, but most human love is in some way. And it can kind of change how you perceive yourself in a contextual understanding. And it means that your whole narratives can change. And then you can say, oh, I misunderstood. I don't have to feel this way about myself. I have to look at my memories this way. Remember that your brain is trying to create maps and correct its maps all the time. So whenever you get an information that will contradict your current understanding, your brain will try to figure out what to do with this. And the moment your brain, when you're under the influence of a substance, go, this is real. This is actually real. Your brain will try to find a way to incorporate that in your current understanding, And then it can start to move things around. So this is also why it works.
We have a question from Bashir on YouTube. He asks, why are people using substances now, mostly younger people? But based on what you're saying now, maybe that's more an older version. In the 50s and 60s, it was more young people. But it sounds like you're saying that this new wave of psychedelics is dominated by people who have a bit more mature approach.
Well, I think, again, we have to look at people take substances today mostly for like self-medication purposes. Young people take drugs, they drink, they do all of these things as part of experimenting with themselves. That's a whole different thing, right? And there are more drugs available, so they take anything, right? And a lot of it is really dangerous and it's not healthy. And the way young people relate to drugs is not healthy. We're not talking about that at all. And this is what we need to understand. What we are moving towards is an understanding of how these tools can be used as tools, how we can manipulate our own brains and then enter a different level where we can then work. But we have to understand that we can't use those substances as drugs and believe that it will have any spiritual significance. And this is the big difference, that there are so many people around the world who've had experiences with substances in a therapeutic and spiritual context. And that's radically different. Now, when we look at how these tools work, your intention and your consciousness and your discipline will make all the difference. If you are dedicated to your spiritual work, then the changes in your brain simply means, okay, I can enter a different way of assembling information. And I can study that. I can go beyond my normal stress, my normal blockages, my normal stories, my normal trauma, all my excuses, all my justifications for why I can't. All of that, I'm able to let that go for a while, and then I will use that to connect with what's real in me, what's real in the world. I will study the fuck out of it. And I will try to figure out whatever I'm not able to figure out when I'm in my kind of like day-to-day consciousness, because then I'm just full of whatever's going on. I'm just trying to get by. We need to have that sharp intention. And we need also to build up the discipline. This is why when you look at the traditions, the real ones, not the fake ones that, someone went to Brazil once and thought it was part of the ceremony and now he knows everything and come back and have his certain, it's not that. There are people who've dedicated their entire lives to the spiritual practice of working with what you enter. When you're working with substances, and some people specialize themselves in one type of substance and they work with the energy and the consciousness and the state, it's a whole different thing, because then they hold the space. When you take the substance, you're brought into that space and they can guide you and they can assist you therapeutically and spiritually. This is what we're talking about. And it can take years to develop that structure and discipline to get the most out of these substances. Then you're using it as a tool. And this, again, is where we are entering now. Also, in the world of therapy, there's a wave now of medical professionals, both psychologists and psychiatrists and others, embracing this as a way to open the mind. And yes, PTSD, that's number one. Depression, general depression as well. It can also be, even several forms of inflammation. That can also be part of these more kind of subtle illnesses that people have today. Being burned out, chronic fatigue, all of that. Because that's also systemic stress. So you can get the help from these substances to just relax your stories of stress and that everything is wrong with you and the world. It will be kind of drained out, and your brain will get access to overview, and then we'll say that, wow, okay, it's not that bad. You know, I guess my stories are wrong. And then you can let go of that for a while. But the substances in themselves will not really change anything permanently. They will then assist you in kind of draining that stress. But without the right therapeutic work, it will come back. But this is where we started. We've seen so many amazing results, and there are more and more clinical studies done with substances, and they all point in the same direction. All of them. So we're on the brink of a flood wave of the medical communities kind of rediscovering and re-embracing substances for therapeutic use. And again, we have to separate the drug culture from substances as tools in personal growth work. And let's focus on this, not the other part, because that's harmful. It's only harmful and it's dangerous. Many of you guys have probably also had experiences and tried substances, and maybe it's been a combination. That's how it is for most people. It's a combination of self-medication, fun, but also exploration, right? But my point is that the more you focus and the more discipline you have, the more interesting actually it can be to cut through your own blockages. Not that they will disappear, but you get, a break from a certain blockage so you can see what's behind it. Then it can ignite, you can initiate, you can start the work, and then you can reprogram your own brain and your own mind and your own emotions based on those experiences. So, some people ask me about, like, isn't this a shortcut and everything? Yeah, what's wrong with that? Shouldn't we be able to do it on our own? Well, yeah, you could say the same thing about meditation. Shouldn't we just be able to be in that state? But the thing is, the human genetics, as I said, it's only about survival. And the brain will basically cancel out anything else. And this is why most of you find it so difficult to go into spiritual work and spiritual dedication for real. Because your needs, your urges, your emotions, your mind will just pull you into the day-to-day stuff. Because that's what your brain is preoccupied with. But as part of your practices, when you already have spiritual practices, when you're already dedicated, right? And you simply want to figure out how to get past and your blockages and kind of get ahead. It can be interesting to then change the modality of the brain and then explore and then do the work. So we don't have to do everything on our own. I see everything available to us as humans as equal. They're just, matter in different constellations. It's all about our intentions and what we want to achieve. And with substances, especially psychedelics, I find it really interesting that what you end up with, the result is 100% based on your intention and your level of dedication. So some people may just experience, fluffy garbage. And some people may be completely confronted with what they need to deal with and also get the overview that instructs them how to deal with it. And that is absolutely wonderful when that happens. There were some comments or questions, yeah?
Yeah. Control the health system, medicine. It is, we can say that the Norwegian system is based on medicine the doctor's perspective. The system are controlling people with their education around medicine.
Mm-hmm.
It's for me personal as being very spiritual. It's very provocerende.
Mm-hmm.
As my family is very attached to the health system and the vaccine. And I've just it's so provoked
What's your question?
a conversation with you or opposites. When the government is trying to take you, when they have your family, and me as a very spiritual person, I know how fantastic my brain is, and to sense and have this knowledge and to see and understand that somewhere in the system it stops the women, the health, that the infrastructure
Sure. Okay.
that the women
Now,
have.
I think it's important to understand that when we incarnate together, it's always different levels of consciousness, different pathways, different journeys, different levels of evolution. And we have to find our own path in that. Our journey is not depending on other people's choices. And yet we incarnate together, and it means it's also a co-creation between different levels of consciousness and different ways of understanding the world and different ways of studying the world, and there's room for that. Remember that whatever we experience as an individual, that is our own mirror image. There is no such thing as someone doing anything to us. It's always us first projecting our own assumptions about reality, and then life mirroring it back through also other people. So we are drawn to and gravitate towards whatever is the externalization of our own consciousness. And for that, we also need different people in different consciousness. So, for instance, when we have a certain blockage, that blockage will vibrate on a lower consciousness than we often will identify with. And for that to then externalize, we need someone who's able to act out that low vibration and that low consciousness, which means that maybe that individual is on that evolutionary level while you identify with a higher level, but it's still your blockage being shown to you through that person. And so it is with everyone. We need every level of consciousness available because we consist of every level of consciousness. And also in this society, when it comes to how the Western world developed medicine and the thoughts around medicine, that simply is the externalization of the collective body of consciousness and the Western understanding of things. And it's necessary. And Western medicine has done a lot of wonderful things. It's also limited because humans are limited. And still, we all can find our own pathways. We can all, study ourselves and the world the way we want to. Remember, we incarnate exactly where we want to be. Also, one thing I think is really important to understand when it comes to limitation is that limitation is specialization. When we need to study something specific spiritually, we need to not be distracted by absolutely everything. Just like when it comes to your own survival and your brain taking away everything that's not relevant for your horizontal survival. So it is with how you incarnate and the different settings and the different limitations in those settings. It assists us in keeping specialized in the karma we are here to deal with. And often, just like in school, we find, that homework can be very unfair. I don't want to study this. And life says, yeah, you do. Because that's where you are. It's needed. And you don't get it now, but, you'll get it once you're an adult. And life is that way. So the limitations, the boundaries, and the kind of force that we experience as individuals are part of that specialization. It makes us focus on certain things and get specialized experiences that will still mirror our own consciousness, and that's why we squirm. That's why we don't like them, and we feel limited, and we feel, basically captured and tortured sometimes. But it's because life is limiting our focus so we can encounter and interact with our own karma. And we do that in all spaces. And it's important to remember that behind all of those manifestations, there is love. We all incarnate together spiritually because we want to assist each other. All levels of life, we're all the same. And once we're out of these forms, we recognize that. So we choose to incarnate together in all levels because we are completely dependent on each other to grow, not just to nurture and support, but also to hold up the mirror, also to help each other focus and to specialize the experiences and how we externalize our own consciousness. And part of that, why psychedelics are interesting, again, in this landscape that we're talking about now, is also because, we do get limited. And sometimes when we look at, our homework and we can't understand it, right? Sometimes, just like, also at work, when you get stuck, sometimes it can help just to take a walk, right? Getting a different perspective. And we live in a society where the perspective is very much specialized, in the collective consciousness. And we're part of that machinery. And for some people, it's very, very difficult to get out of it, even with spiritual practices. So with use of substances, we can kind of bypass that and enter a space where everything is possible, and we can remind ourselves that I am not this. I am not the society. I'm not the rules. And my brain can take information, assemble it in a very different way, and I actually have the capacity to do that. How wonderful, how interesting, how creative, right? And for many people, therefore, substances used correctly can open up inspiration and connection, and also get the feel that, yes, I'm responsible for my path. That does not mean that I'm limited. I, as me, I have all of this available to me, and I can be more creative. I can look at life in a different way. I don't have to limit myself by the collective narratives of human society. And I think, those aspects of substances are really, really interesting.
So a couple of practical questions from Zoom. Which substances would you say have the most spiritual potential? And how would you assist us in helping people separate the spiritual potential substances and narcotics? Because I think some people might mix up narcotics.
Right. Now,
and one other, and then the aspect of intentional use in kind of a one time versus microdosing.
Okay.
That
We just like
so
start
practical.
with one thing at a time. Now, what substances are the most spiritual? People who know me, you will know the answer. It's chocolate. It's always chocolate, without a doubt, every time. Now, besides that, it's really depending on where you are at and what you want to study, right? Because each type of substance, they work differently. And they will change how your brain works in different ways. That in itself is not spiritual, it's biological. It's important to understand this. It's a tool, and it's how you use it that will determine whether you get spiritual results, psychological results, emotional results, mental results, or just nothing. That's up to you. So no tools in themselves are spiritual. It's the same thing. Meditation is not necessarily spiritual. It depends on how you use it, right? So tools are tools. So if you want to test out substances, I would first kind of read up and figure out what you're drawn to and why, and then also find someone who is skilled. Now, we will here at the center and the clinic, over time, we will probably start this year, also offer substance treatment. And that is also in the context of therapy. And we will be working with medical professionals. So everything also will be legal. It will be kind of medical. And everything will be overseen by doctors and professionals. And then we also have our own therapists. So we will have this whole machinery. And then we'll have the spiritual aspect of, first connecting you to that level, and then we will make you work. Because that's where the fun is. So we will start that this year, and we will over time also offer retreats where people can come from all over the world to do this type of work. Because again, it's not about the substance. It's opening your mind to a certain level, and then the work starts. So again, I think, if you want to experiment with substances, I think it's more a matter of finding people that are skilled. I think that's where I would start. And then see what they work with. Because if you want spiritual results, just taking stuff and see what happens, that's not how we do it. You need the framework, you need the discipline, you need someone who can stretch you and connect you to the highest potential of that substance and bring you into that work. So I would start with finding the right facilitators, not the substance. So that's my advice. Okay, so question number 2 was?
It was about microdosing versus one-time uses.
Yes, I think that's also very different, because microdosing can give you that little kind of help your brain to remind yourself. My experience is, if you do not have an active practice, it's a complete waste of everything, because then you expect the substance to do it for you. If you have a daily practice, for instance, where you want to study specifically through what that substance is doing, then it can absolutely be productive. But again, people are lazy and they want the substances to do the work. And then it's just self-medication again to get through the day. It's not what we're talking about. So microdosing needs to be disciplined. And it needs to be part of your daily practice and reminding yourself several times a day and studying through the lens of that particular substance. Otherwise, it's a complete waste of time and you're just fooling yourself. And it's the same thing also when you have a one-time use. Unless you have that spiritual purpose and intention, don't do it. That's my advice. Then it's better to let yourself be confronted by life without trying to numb yourself, because then that's what we're doing, right? So back to intention and discipline and dedication. That's everything when it comes to this work. It brings it into a whole different realm. Then it was, yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak a bit about the perspective of control, also in relation to this subject today, because in my experience, I feel like our whole society is based on a lot of control. And also, in my experience that I have seen with these substances, is that a potential of losing control is very healthy, because what a lot of these substances do is actually go beyond what we're used to and what we are controlling, and that accesses so much more than, and that is so, I feel that that could be a real big potential for not just on an individual level, but also at large, to expand and lose that need for control, and also see that maybe that isn't so necessary because we don't have any control
Sure.
in the first place.
But control is also extremely important when it comes to horizontal survival. Remember, when you look at evolution of humans, everything has been about controlling yourself, controlling what you do, controlling what's outside of you, and controlling the outcome. Farming, for instance, is all about controlling, right? It's first defining, and that's control, and then controlling the soil, controlling what you do, controlling the plants, controlling the water, it's all about control. So humans, from, the moment we left the trees, we had to control our environment, right? So we learned that control equals survival and result. And then when we started building society, when I control myself, I can do great things. When I control my emotions, I get different results. If I can control my mind and my actions, I can manipulate. I can climb the ladder of society. It's always about control, because control determines your outcome. So when it comes to doing anything, like science is control. Science is about understanding how we get control by being able to predict the outcome. So everything in our civilization is based on the principle of control. If we let go of that, we'll be back in the trees before we know it. And, so we have to understand that there are different forms of control, right? So let me just go through the argument here, that we need control and master it in order to let go of it, right? Because the principle of mastery means that you have so much control that you can relax. You find the balancing point. It's only then that you're able to let life flow through. Therefore, I often talk about, that we play our own instruments and thinking like a musician. It's only when you are a real pianist that you can channel, right? And that's letting go of control. But you let go of control completely, but you have the structure that is completely controlled, because that's in the structure that nature needs to be able to distribute itself and be channeled. It can't be channeled through nothing. It needs structure. So the conclusion is, in order to let go of control, you first need complete control. And this is often what people get wrong. They want to lose control where they don't have any, because they don't master themselves or their elements. And then they, well, it's because, I feel limited. Yeah, it's because you are not in control of yourself, your mediums, and you're not able to control the outcome, and that's very frustrating. But then discipline, learning the work, getting in a way more control, is also how we learn to work with nature, because it's not all about controlling nature, it's about controlling ourselves. And this is the maturity of control. As the ego, we start with controlling the world, right? And then we gradually, when we try to do that, and as we get more control, it hits us. And gradually, we begin to understand, it's about controlling myself. And it's not just controlling myself, it's controlling my being, controlling my consciousness, and finding the balancing point. And then you realize, this is not really about control. It's about being one with the universe. But you have to go through those steps. It's only then you can let go. So this is when discipline and control looks effortless, right? When you look at a ballerina, when you look at a surfer, when you look at a musician channeling, effortless. But it took a lot of control to get there, right? And this is part of the spiritual disciplines. This is why when we have spiritual practices and we work, it's controlling yourself, it's forcing yourself, it's all of that until it becomes effortless. And then you're just in the flow because it just happens, but you have the inner structure built by discipline. So also when it comes to substance work in control, it can actually also help you build control. Because often what we experience is our stories and our scars and everything we've been through means that we're sitting with a map of life that is not correct. And when we then try to control ourselves and control life, it doesn't work and we get frustrated and we think more control. But when we don't have the right starting point, right? When we're already, when we're sitting with a storyline and a map that simply doesn't work, and we insist because I have to survive, that can get in the way. And this is basically what our blockages are. It's basically we hold on to something that's not working. And then, yes, if we can just relax the muscles, right? And see, okay, maybe I can dare to just like let go a little bit and see what happens. Then I can learn how to position myself, what is actually going on, because I'm not constantly trying to tell myself what's going on. I can let go of that and start listening. And then maybe I will be able to see something I overlooked before. And then I can correct my maps. So I can then be in control of what I express and what I do in the world and find those balancing points. So it's always about breathing in and out. It's control and being effortless. But if you start with being effortless, as many people do, I should just be in a flow. There's nothing. You're just basically goo, right? And understanding the level of discipline and dedication it takes for something to get effortless, people are going to recognize this in any field of expertise and artistic expression, but it's even more the case when it comes to spiritual work.
Speaking of effortless, we're all familiar with the brain-destroying effects of alcohol. We have Ebba in Germany wondering, do the psychedelics have any such effect on the brain? Should we be concerned about that?
Right. You can kill yourself by drinking water or salad or bananas. Anything can kill you. Anything can damage you profoundly. It depends on how you interact with that, whatever it is. Right? So it's never about that thing or substance. It's about how you use it. Right? You can kill yourself. I'm sure you've read stories about people, drowning in a dog's water bowl, stuff like that. It's like, how can it happen? It can happen. Anything can kill you if you want to. So it's understanding that let go of the stories and the fear, oh, can this harm me? Like anything can harm you. And anything can also lift you. It depends on, interacting with something competently. So, can you get brain damage from substances? Of course. It depends on how much. But the science is clear when it comes to addiction, for instance. These substances, especially like psychedelics, that's what we're talking about, is now being used to treat addiction. Right? Severe drug addiction. Because we're not talking about heroin here. We're talking about psychedelics. Mushrooms, MDMA, LSD, ayahuasca, ketamine, substances that have that therapeutic effect. So, used correctly, they will not harm you. They are not dangerous. But you need to know what you're doing, just like with anything in life. So again, I will never advise anyone to just like try things, see what happens. You need to find the expert first, right? And then see what they are working with. Because you have to enter a space, you need to be taught how to do this. And with the work we will be offering here, we will have, again, the whole framework, the whole machinery. We will have medical professionals, besides our own professionals, working together to make sure that the people who come to us will be getting, both that training in themselves, and will be an environment that is completely safe, and it will even go through medical screening by doctors on beforehand to make everything safe. So people who are dedicated to what they do, they will make sure that you get exactly what you need and nothing more, right? So you have to start with finding the right people, not the substance.
Okay. Well, I had two questions, but I just start with one and see where we go from there. I was curious if you could speak a little bit about the connection between nature, the human being, and the role psychedelics play in that interrelation. And maybe it's self-explanatory, but I was
Right.
curious about that.
Well, I think it's a great question because it brings us kind of to the core of what we're dealing with. Humans behave very artificially, right? We have created a civilization believing that we're something besides nature. We've created this really weird narrative that first there are humans and then there's like, stuff, scenery, and believing that we are so special. And, we watched a show, I think it was last night or the night before. It's so funny when you look at pets and how scientists still saying, whoa, could it be that they behave as if, they understand what we're saying, or they behave as if they actually have a thought, stuff like that. And it's like, are we still there? And humans are so, in a way, disconnected from nature, and so easy for humans to be in a state of disconnect, that we behave out of sync. We are basically the elephant in the china shop all the time. But because we're blind and deaf, we can't see it. But all the other life forms look at us like, what? And it's that. And because we have convinced ourselves that the human space that we've created, which is all about controlling nature and forcing it into being what we want it to be in our space, and then believing this is reality, and the rest is garnish, right? It's just there, but it doesn't matter. So bringing us back into the experience of being connected with nature. Psychedelics can actually help humans just having that experience. For many humans to experience, wow, I'm connected with nature. Ooh, I can feel the tree. That's a big thing. We should be able to do that by ourselves, right? But we have convinced ourselves in believing that the constructed human reality is real. And we've forgotten how to be part of nature. And I think when people experience being a part of nature and being able to pick up on information signals from other life forms and are saying, oh, this is actually real, something happens, right? Because part of humans becoming more balanced, and for this civilization to become more balanced, we need to recognize that, yeah, other life forms are here too, and they're real, and they're communicating. And what they say about us is not flattering, and we need to kind of start addressing our own state of disconnect. And yes, I think if we took, all the industrial leaders in the world, and stuffed them full of mushrooms and psychedelics, I think we would start seeing a change immediately, right? So yes, I think in the process of humans just having the experience of connectedness and understand this is real, that is very helpful. So I think for that reason alone, I think people who have not experienced connectedness with nature, I would then advise people to please try a psychedelic and go hug a fucking tree. You know, it's like, see what happens. Open yourself up and understand that, yeah, we are living networks of information. We're all connected. And that is reality. The human state of disconnect is a huge misunderstanding and has caused so much suffering. And that is what we need to correct. But I think also, again, the collective consciousness this time around with psychedelics is in a different place. And it's interesting, even in the more conservatives of kind of health professional communities, it's starting to gain momentum. So even in this country that is considered to be very conservative and very focused on conventional medicine, this is now conventional medicine. It's been established. And in this country, the use of ketamine, treating disorders and depression and all of that is now legal. And it's starting to gain momentum because they're trying to figure out how to do it. But people are being educated, and also we're part of that whole movement. So it's changing, right? So it's not, because everyone understands that it's not drug use, you know, it's wonderful tools when applied correctly. So this is definitely becoming part of the establishment in the way that we almost got to in the 60s, and then it collapsed. This time it will not be stopped. It cannot be stopped because humans are on a different level. So this time we will see that this will gain momentum. It will again be this flood wave, and it will be embraced. And this is also why we're talking about it, because, you know, it will be, you know, you can get it at a doctor near you pretty soon. Not yet, but it will happen. And in 10 to 20 years from now, it will be definitely part of the established way of treating many different forms of suffering, especially those who do not respond to other forms of medicine. And this is when you look at a lot of the work in the clinical trials, is with those who do not respond to anything else, with wonderful results. And again, when we combine this with therapeutic and spiritual work, you can really get shit done.
Can I ask the other
Yeah,
question?
sure.
So this is actually coming back to what you're talking about, and you were mentioning it before in regards to therapeutical use. And I was curious about this because we're developing this kind of therapeutic way of interacting with these substances, and I'm curious about what do you like, how do you reflect upon the differences between the indigenous ceremonial traditions and how they, like their perspective, how they approach these medicines versus kind of the more Western therapeutical way, which is more, I mean, it's in a more controlled environment. And yeah, I'm curious about what the effect of these two will be and how this will interact with Western society.
Yes. Now, what we see in the medical community for now is mostly, as I said, like you lie in a bed and you will get a substance and then, you know, listen to some elevator music and off you go, you know, and that's it. But it's changing because what they know also in the conservative medical communities is that people have spiritual experiences. Things happen and we don't know what it is, but it's very profound. And they have all of these different experiences. Things happen. They know this, but they don't know what to do with it, right? So I think this time around, yeah, the realization this is something that's actually happened, because in the old days it was that, well, they're hallucinating. Now it's they're having experiences, right? So this will now influence. It's a Trojan horse. It's really what it is, because it means that you have more health professionals interacting with people who are having profound experiences beyond what, beyond the maps of the current medical understanding. But everyone working in this field, they are aware that this is happening and they are interested. This is why this will not go away this time. So we will bring more in of that personal growth work and spiritual aspects into the medical field, because now there's a bridge, right? They can see with their own eyes that people are having profound experiences, and they get insight and they get realizations. They see things differently, right? And that has a deep effect. And that is not hallucination. So everyone's aware that there's a whole level here of things happening in people's minds and consciousness. And now there is a curiosity that was not there before. Because now science and also medical science have reached a level where they say, yeah, we don't know everything, right? Because now humans have experienced too much. So we're past that post-war era where science, the answer to everything, and and the goal was for everyone just to eat pills for dinner and everything to be automated. Like, we're past that level. So now we use science to be curious. Instead of providing limitations, it provides a skeleton, so that we can move and be curious and expand. So the whole medical profession has changed. And this is starting to open up. So this is a Trojan horse in bridging biology with more of that spiritual growth work. And this is also why I'm very optimistic and hopeful and think this will be a lot of fun. Because it's kind of people in spiritual work, in therapeutic work, can then be able to go in and help establish medicine with new definitions and new maps that they can use in what they understand. This is beyond our understanding, and we can go, but we do understand, right? So that is now starting to happen, and it's absolutely wonderful.
Okay, so as we wrap up, Udny on YouTube, she's heading off on an ayahuasca retreat next week. And perhaps you could give us some general advice. How do we integrate these experiences with psychedelics?
Right. I think it's a great question, because the experience with many of those retreats is that, yeah, they're fun while they happen, and then you bring it back, and then after a while, it's all the same. There is nothing wrong with that, but it's back to our culture lacking spiritual stamina, spiritual understanding, and the discipline that you often find in these traditions. So when you come into a setting like that and you don't have that ingrained in you, it will be an experience, but it will not kind of stick, right? Because then you need the spiritual work. So I think it's just be realistic about where we are at in our Western society, that there's a lot we don't understand, and that going on these retreats can be wonderful, but don't expect it to stick, right? And this is, again, what we will be building here at the center over time, is exactly that, because over the years, I can tell you how many people I've worked with that have gone to different retreats and places and tried out different things, and they do it again and again, and they start realizing that nothing is really changing. And I say, yeah, it's because you don't have the skill set. So basically, you enter that space, but then you're supposed to build a structure so that space becomes permanent. So you don't need any substance to have access or to operate there, because it should be permanent. And that's also the potential, right? You can use substances to then enter a modality in your mind that enables you to enter levels of information that is not part of your day-to-day processing. But then you have to process, then you have to work. And this will take time for most people, I think, to understand, because in the West, we want instant gratification. We want experience, we want fun. And yeah, that's okay. And I think for people to explore this field can be of value in and of itself, because it can make people connect with also biologically. Oh, okay, this is real. There is something beyond my own mind, because up till now I just thought it was a belief. Wasn't sure whether I believed it or not, but now I do. That in itself can be profound. But again, we also need to have the spiritual practice and the discipline, because over time you will not be needing the substances. They're there to basically blast open the doors that you've been trying to open for a long time. And when that's done, there's nothing else really to do, right? It's really just to assist ourselves as yet another tool. And so that's my approach to the use of all these substances, is to assist ourselves in moving beyond the blockages, and then we have to work with them as the result, because they don't disappear. We just get a sneak preview of what it's like beyond it. And then we have to go back and do the work. So just, have fun when you go to retreats and explore and open yourself to the experience, and just try to be in the intention of stretching yourself spiritually as much as possible, to explore what is there, like, what can I get into contact with in myself and beyond myself, and just also have fun with it. I think it's so important that we're playful and that we don't take things too seriously and make everything into religion, which humans also do. We need to explore, and we need to be free. And this, I think, is also a valuable part of the reintroduction of substances, is that it can also represent more of that playful element. Or for many, it's like, it's a carnival. It's just fun and things happen. And for many people, that's a great starting point. We need to do more of that too. But when it comes to expansion of consciousness for real, it doesn't happen that way. That happens after. That happens when you build it from scratch. When you build your consciousness, when you do the work. So do not be fooled by thinking that these substances will do the work for you, because they don't, right? And because that's when it goes sideways. You need to understand that it simply changes the modality in your brain, and that's it. It's how you utilize it, what you do after, and how you use it as a tool in your own spiritual work. That's what determines what type of result you're getting. And therefore also, yes, how the medical community, by and large, how they're using it now, just by giving you the substance and, let you lie there, it does not give permanent results in the way you can get if you do the growth work at the same time. So when you go to retreats and explore, focus on the work, focus on the practice, focus on being dedicated in your heart, trying to connect with nature, trying to connect with the divine also in yourself. And have that intention of unlocking yourself as a spiritual being in the world, and going beyond the human narrative and the human definitions. Because remember that you are not human. As spirit, you are living in a human body, but it doesn't mean that you as soul are limited by it. And that's also the fun of what you can experience, more of you. More colors, more aspects of what you actually are, and connecting more to what consciousness can be when it's more free from the human form and from the human narratives. And then the work is integrating that so that your human journey also fully can be a spiritual one. And that does not happen through the substances. It happens as the result of the work you do but that can be inspired by substances. So, we're at the starting point of this potentially growing into something wonderful in our culture. But I think therefore also those of you who are interested in working with substances, that you try to be part of how we need to do this for real to establish it. Try to inspire other people and see them as tools in our growth work and not as the growth work. You understand the difference? And try to remind people that they have to be in a state of dedication. They need to be extremely focused on what it is they want to achieve. And to also talk with others about how to use this in a productive way spiritually. And to inspire people to, again, be more playful and more open. And as we talked about, just the experience of being connected to life around you can, for humans, be life-changing. And I would also say life-saving, right? Because our life as humans, it's quite lonely. And I deal with so many people who come to me who feel lonely. And so loneliness is arrogance. There's life absolutely everywhere. The fact that you choose not to connect is sheer arrogance. And then we feel sorry for ourselves because we're lonely. It's not possible. You're surrounded by life, 24/7. And that is also why substance can help us to connect with life around us, but then you have to take the memories with you, the sensation and the experience, and try to make it permanent. Remind yourself every day to open your heart, to be connected, to stay connected, right? Because life is always there inviting us. And it's when we get drowned in the seriousness of our human journeys, we disconnect and we forget. So use substances if you want to try to regain memory, to regain playfulness, to just remind yourself and get these glimpses of inspiration. But then do the work, and do the work for real. Because that's also how these wonderful tools can establish themselves in the collective consciousness, the way they were meant to, and the way they've been following humans in their kind of spiritual ambition throughout evolution.
Thank you, IKYA. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here on IKYA Live. We will be back with you next Monday at 7 o'clock, and we look forward to hearing lots of stories of intentional and loving tree hugging in the coming weeks. Remember that the conversation continues in the comments under this video on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, ikya.official. Also, join us at ikya.org to find out more about what's going on. Sign up for our newsletter. And don't forget our social media, ikya.official on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. And remember that these teachings and this consciousness really grows in the world through each and every one of us, and us sharing and giving the gift of this teaching to others. So please share tonight's episode, share IKYA's YouTube channel, share our social media with others. Remember that that's the way it grows, that's the way it affects and really impacts our world. So please get out and share, and IKYA Live is a really wonderful tool to do that. So we look forward to seeing you again next week, Monday at 7 o'clock here at IKYA Live.